Well, good morning. Welcome to this episode of our Election Science Office Hours series of videos and podcasts. We're now in the immediate aftermath of the 2024 election, and we just actually emerged in California from the canvass period. And I'm really excited to have with us today Tommy Gong, who has spent over 2 decades in this field of election administration and has a wealth of experience that we're going to try to tap into as much as we can in 30 or 40 minutes today. Tommy currently serves as the Deputy County Clerk-Recorder in Contra Costa County, which is located up in the north in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, where he served since 2021. Before that, he previously served as the elected County Clerk-Recorder for San Luis Obispo County, which is in the middle part of the state. And he started his career in Stanislaus County, which is also up further north than us here. So his experience in 3 different counties in California. He's an advisory board member for the Election Official Legal Defense Network, board director for the California Voter Foundation, and he served on the executive committee of the California Association of Clerks and Election Officials. He's led the effort to form the Coalition of Bay Area Election Officials for the neighboring counties in the Bay Area to collaborate and join forces on how to build trust, in particular, since they all have shared media markets there. The coalition earned a really prestigious honor, the Democracy Award for Best Practice in 2022 from the National Association of Election Officials, which is now called the Election Center, and a Cleary Award in 2023 for Distinguished Voter Education and Communication Initiatives from the U.S. Election Assistance Commission. Tommy earned his BA at the University of California, Berkeley. Sorry, wish he could have been at Caltech, but that's okay. Berkeley's a pretty good school. He was one of the first graduates of the California Professional Election Administrator Credential in 2005 and has completed the National Certified Election Registration Administrator Certificate Program at the Election Center in 2021. So, Tommy, thanks for joining us today.
Great. Thanks for having me, Michael.
So as many of the people who've been watching and viewing this over the last couple of months, these office hours episodes, the responsibilities and duties of election officials differ dramatically across counties and states. You've had experience in 3, but can you tell us exactly what you do in the Contra Costa Deputy Clerk, County Clerk Recorder's role?
Yes. So basically, when you are in a clerk recorder office in California that are given responsibilities of conducting elections, then you do basically have some split duties in your department. So namely, you have the clerk recorder duties, which is basically to handle all of the public records related to land documents. Let's say somebody purchases a home or a piece of property, that all gets recorded within the county where the transaction occurred. We also hold as the county clerk all of the birth certificates, death certificates, marriage licenses for those who conduct that business, so to speak, in the county. And then, of course, we have the elections. Now, I will share that when I was in San Luis Obispo, we also had the clerk of the board duties in order to clerk the meetings. And so in that way, even more so, I saw myself as one of the county historians in that way. But I always like to say to folks in the public that at some time in your life, you're probably going to do business in the clerk recorder's office, whether you have a child who was born in the county or a loved one who passed away, you bought property in the county, or that you voted in the county. But I always like to say that if you're looking for your divorce papers, don't come to us. You have to go to Superior Court for that. We're only the happy department providing services to the public.
So how do folks get into this career path? I mean, how did you find yourself going into this path, in particular here in California?
Yeah, it's really funny. I recall being on a panel with Dean Logan, and I kind of blurted out, who says that when they grow up they want to be an election official? Most folks, in the elections world stumbled into the profession. And Dean kind of raised his hand and he sort of said like, well, I'm actually one of those that did. And it's a very rare instance that you find those types of people. So I'll say for me, the 2000 election was very fresh in my mind, with as close as the contest was and how delayed the final outcome would be, even with the Supreme Court activity involving it and the recounts and all of that. So I was really intrigued with the process at that point. I will share that I was operating our family business. We had a grocery business in the Central Valley of California. My folks had been doing it for over 50 years. And so I thought I was going to retire a groceryman actually. But time came for us to actually sell the business. And so it was around that time after the 2000 election. And so an elections manager position opened up in Stanislaus County. And I said, what the heck, how complicated can elections be? I think I'll apply to that. And so lo and behold, I was hired. My first major election in that county was the governor recall of 2003. That is the one with Arnold Schwarzenegger on the ballot and the other 135 or so candidates on that ballot. And so it was really intriguing. There was a lot of voter interest in that election, and I caught basically what is called the election bug, right? It was just really exciting work. We always look for ways to improve our process after each election. And so when we're looking, how well did we do the following election and all. And so that's really how I kind of stumbled into and got started in the world of elections.
It's fascinating because the 2000 election, which, like Caltech students barely have ever heard of when I teach elections like I did this fall, was also a lot of the reason why I got into this specific area of election administration and voting technology. It was a very formative election for lots of us.
Yeah, it was a real game changer when you think about it. The 2000 election still has reverberations in our elections today, as does 2020, for example. But 2000 really kind of changed things for election offices. And I remember as I was starting, I was already hearing from those in the profession, those in our state association, how things are really changing, and things really did after the 2000 with HAVA, for example, and voting equipment, new voting technology, statewide voter registration databases, for example. Those things really advanced the profession, and they all emanate from the 2000 election.
So what's the most interesting part of your job?
The most interesting part. So I will say, I really have become an elections junkie in that way. And so for me, it's really been seeing how others do the same job, how others do the work, and especially what are the challenges for a small, medium, or large jurisdiction, for example, and how are how does the volume in a larger county, what are the things that you have to do to prepare for, an onslaught of ballots versus a smaller county, which might not have as much of that to deal with, but they have a much, much smaller staff. So I think it's those types of things, seeing what offices struggle with and what they're doing well, and being able to see if I can apply those types of learnings to, my current job.
Mm-hmm. And what's the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge. So I will say in Contra Costa, operationally, we are doing exceedingly well in terms of how we conducted the election, all of the various processes and procedures. But the one thing that we have little control over is public opinion. And it's that challenge there about how can we raise trust in elections from our constituents within the county, for example. That would be one I see as a challenge. The other I would see as a challenge is legislation, emerging legislation that might have really unintended consequences, and what are ways that we need to work with our legislature, for example, to try to navigate those desires that might be emanating from these bills. And so how can we work with them in trying to advance the profession and the things that they have in mind.
Mhm. So that's a kind of a great pivot point for us too, because one of the things that really caught my attention with respect to the work that you were doing in 2024 was how you were focusing a lot of attention on building trust, but more specifically on trying to deal with the rumors, the misinformation, the misconceptions that people have about how elections are run nationally in California, but specifically in your county. And just as a kind of shameless self-promotion, in January 16th through 17th, we're having a conference at Caltech on this very topic, and you're going to be one of the participants in that conference. And so we're really excited about that. What rumors and misconceptions were really prevalent in Contra Costa County this fall? What did you really hear a lot of in the fall's election?
Yeah, so I will say that it wasn't really anything locally based, let me just say. And what I've really noticed is that, because of the advent of social media, let's just say, that the world has gotten a lot smaller in the elections profession, right? I think before the advent of social media, who would know what was happening in other corners of the country, for example, as much as we do today. And so the world has gotten a lot smaller. And so many of the rumors or the misinformation that was emanating in Contra Costa was based on national headlines.
Mhm.
And because they would hear something coming from another state, then they were wondering, well, what's the case in California? And if it didn't answer their question adequately, then they would have doubts about the process. And so that's how I really kind of see it. It wasn't really anything happening locally here, but rather the national narrative and what was driving that.
Mhm.
For
So
example,
I'm
yeah,
sorry.
for example, I think one would be the notion of non-citizens, largely voting in
Right.
our elections, right? So that was a rather new thing, I will say, that didn't come in 2020. So that was something that came out about, well, what about these non-citizens that are registering and voting, for example? And so those were things that we had to answer to certain members of the public. And the thing is that and I remember this early on in my career of, what do election officials rely on? What's the leg that we stand on? And that is the laws that we abide by in conducting the election, according to California, for example, right? And so those are always the things that we're looking to, those are the things that we have to abide by. And therefore, all of our processes and procedures have to support, those particular requirements.
So how do you deal with the misinformation and the rumors and the misconceptions? So let's talk maybe specifically about non-citizen voting. So if someone contacted your office or came in or called you or sent you an email, what was the method that you used to try to deal with a constituent, from Contra Costa County who's concerned about non-citizen voting?
Yeah, we would have to rely on and that, the voter signs an affidavit, testifying that they are a U.S. citizen, that it's already against the law for non-citizens to register, that there are some checks and balances in our registration system that do support the citizen status of a voter, such as at the DMV and all. There are some mechanisms that support that procedure for us, and so we communicated those things to them. Now, I will say a large part of it is that part of the misinformation, disinformation piece is that voters and the public largely don't understand all of the processes and procedures that election officials conduct their elections by. So it's just a big black box. And so we took it upon ourselves in the last 3 years or so to really educate the public about all of the processes and procedures that we utilize to conduct elections. And, such as vote by mail, right? Vote by mail is one that was subject to a lot of rumor and innuendo and all. And so, who knows that we signature check every vote by mail ballot that we receive, right? If they could see all of the chain of custody procedures that we do to ensure that those ballots that are to be counted are held safe and secure, all the way through our tabulation process and our storage procedures after after they're counted. So we've conducted quite a few tours for those who had questions about it, and they had no idea about all of the different checks and balances, all of the different procedures that we have in place to conduct our elections. And so that's one thing I recognize that we need to do as a profession, is really let the public know what it is that we do and why they can have faith and trust in the election process.
I will say that, again, having been in this field for as long as you have, for over 2 decades, that's been one of the biggest transformations that I've seen in the world of election administration, is that 20 some years ago, I do think that election administration held sort of behind I was just behind a veil of almost ignorance, and now many of you and most of your colleagues who I know are incredibly transparent, incredibly open, and are really willing to accommodate and talk to the public and stakeholders about their questions and concerns, and provide really important and useful, timely information about how you run elections to try to dispel the rumors and misinformation.
Yes, exactly. That's I do recognize that at 20 years ago, that the way I like to say it is, the election officials kind of shunned the media, because if you were in the news, it was bad news. And so because of that, and of course the media does have that good government whistleblower responsibility to put out the news to the public of how the government is operating, for example. And so because of that, I think there was kind of this election officials were kind of caught in this situation. And so how do you work with the media that's going to ask those types of questions, instead of being a partner with the agency and really trying to get out the information? So that's what I will say. I noticed what happened in around 2020 is that the media really did want to know, like, what are you going to do about COVID, for example? Right. And so what I noticed is that the media kind of embraced election offices, wanted to help us get our word across, and to let the voters know what their options are to cast their ballots, under our, health regulations and all. And so that's what I had kind of noticed from 2020 and then beyond, going into 2024, that we could really partner with the media to be able to tell them our story, and to also let the voters know, what do they need to do? What are the things that they need to understand? And so I've really seen it as really a positive relationship with the media. If they're going to call us out, we need to be open about it and transparent about it at the same time too, but that we could really utilize them and leverage them, as I call, tenuous allies to getting the word out to the public.
Yeah, I really love the way you described how that transition has occurred, and one from almost kind of an adversarial relationship, with the media, and maybe just not a transparency with stakeholders and the public, to one of partnership, not just partnership with the media, but I also think in some ways partnership with your stakeholders and even your voters, right? Who come in and want to learn more about what's going on, even those who might be a little more aggressive about it, and who may be misinformed when they come in. I just have seen this dramatic change, among the election officials who I work with, and I think that's one for the better. I hope it continues in the future.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. I mean, I think we do recognize that as a profession that we really do have to get the word out, and work with our stakeholders and the media and such. I think where the challenge is, though, is in terms of resources, right? So again, when you're dealing with a larger county, you might have the resources to be able to support that type of effort on, as a sustained effort, for example. But I think smaller counties are where the challenges are. I recall being, having to do budgets, prepare budgets, and the way that the county leadership would direct you is, first of all, let us know what you are statutorily required to conduct, to provide services to the public, for example. And it's really at that level of, that's the base level that they're looking at, not really looking at beyond that necessarily. And then, of course, those things that you want to do to provide additional service to the public, then those are going to be supplementary requests up for consideration for county leadership to make that decision of how they're going to split that pie, for example, right? And so, the challenge is that outreach and education, let's say, is not statutorily required. It's a nice to have. And I think those are one of those things that we need to, as a profession, make more that it's a requirement that we have to educate the public about what we're doing. And so, I think there are other areas in government that we could look to find ways to be able to see how they're handling that. Public safety, for example, the health industry, health services provided by counties. What are they doing? What is emanating in their budgets, for example, that we could learn from that we might be able to apply?
So in the kind of conversations that we were having, getting ready for this episode and this segment of Office Hours, you talked about an interesting phrase here, a trifecta of efforts to increase public trust in elections in 2024. So can you explain the three programs that make up this trifecta and how you implemented them and how they worked for you in the 2024 election?
Yes. So I guess it all stems from, first of all, my experience in 2020, right? So, despite all of the efforts that I had made going into the 2020 election in San Luis Obispo, we switched from a polling place to a vote center operation in a matter of months. Huge undertaking, the health and safety, protocol involved in all of that. And despite all of that, there was some degree of doubt of the election, nothing specific in San Luis Obispo. And so when I left for Contra Costa, I guess you could say I took that baggage with me, that I wanted to find a way that, recognizing that we had to find a way to communicate with the public. And so when I landed here in 2021, we were right into the governor recall race then, and then rolling into our 2022 gubernatorial cycle. And so I was having a lot of discussions with the department head then. Contra Costa was dealing with their some degree of doubt, public doubt in elections as well. And so three things emanated from it, not all at the same time, but it kind of went in stages. So I would say the first thing that we talked about was, hey, we have a shared media market here. So is there a way that we could get the Bay Area neighboring counties together to find a way that we could work together and with this mis and disinformation that we're dealing with, that we all recognize that we were dealing with this. And so lo and behold, that 11 out of the 12 counties of the greater Bay Area signed on. And we had discussions and talked through things and, created a Facebook account that we could have a uniform message to, and that's the thing we wanted to see as we found out is if you can have a consistent message with the public, regardless of where you are in the county, then that's half the battle. So it's not that one county saying one thing and another county saying another. So that's one thing that we were able to accomplish rather quickly. And it was really a great way for counties to meet and to discuss things that go beyond mis and disinformation. We had a lot to learn from each other that way. And so it was really a great venue for us to have in that way. So that's the coalition. Again, award-winning, something I'm really proud of that we got off the ground. The second was our Certified Election Observer Program, known as our CEO program. And I will say as I was looking through everything I could about mistrust in elections, I came across the Carter Center's Nonpartisan Observation Program. And I thought that that was really a unique approach to it, that, most of the time when observers come to observe an election, they're there advocating for a candidate or for a measure, for example, local measure. And so, they're coming in with kind of a, rose-colored lens, I guess you could say. And I want them to see it more objectively and to understand, what it is about elections that we do. And so I had the blessing to get that off the ground. And we had done that since 2022. And so we've rolled that into 2024, and it has grown. We had quite a few people in the last two iterations, 14 to 18 folks. We had people from the conservative side of politics participate, ask a lot of questions. I think they got a lot of education, understanding what we do and understanding our challenges. I would almost say that some of them have become advocates for us. Our local Republican Party, when there would be individuals who would have questions about elections or have doubts, that they would actually bring the person in to observe the process. So this all kind of grown out about, this notion of transparency. And so that's something else that I'm really proud of, that we were able to get off the ground and to really educate the public about. And I was looking at the items that would have the most impact to show them about what we would do. So what are the things that they have most questions about? The vote by mail system, what we do for vote by mail, the tabulation system, right? What do we do for security in our office? What do we do for security at our polls and our procedures? We even had them attend a poll worker training so they would understand what are the things that need to take place and why we do the certain things that we do at the polls. And so it was great. That was a great experience, I would say, especially this most recent election. We had some who asked a lot of tough questions to us. And as we were moving from the office to the warehouse, one of them pulled me aside and he said, actually, I just want to tell you, we think you guys are doing a great job. We're just asking the tough questions, but we think that you guys are doing a great job. And that really helped disarm me about that. They're really curious about what it is that we do, that they also want to tell their members, so to speak, that, hey, Contra Costa really has their act together and you can have trust and faith in what they're doing. And so the CEO program has been really a success. And then the last piece I'll say that we had is working with a local public relations firm for really trying to expand our message in the various media markets that we could. And something I'll just say with that is that we have a lot to learn in the profession of how to message to the public. For example, I think we are we're very verbose and word heavy. We have a lot of processes and procedures to explain. And he kept saying, you gotta shorten it. You gotta shorten the message. And so they did some of that for us. They also tested the messaging, which is something that we would not normally do. We wouldn't necessarily have the money to do that. And so that was something else that we learned about is what do you do when you are really going to engage and take outreach and education seriously? What are the metrics you're looking for to determine what would be considered successful or not? So those are things that we really had learned from. And so it's those three programs in combination that I think we had a lot to learn from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all three exciting best practices, and I'm sure that we'll be talking more about this in January at the conference.
Yes.
Now, these things aren't cheap. And as you mentioned earlier, funding for elections and all the other duties that you have in your job are not cheap. And, in a county, you're competing with lots of other important public services, things like education and sanitation and law enforcement. And I know one of the things that you've been advocating for is increasing funding, in particular from the state, for running elections. So can you tell me a little bit more about, what are you doing and what are your colleagues doing to try to improve funding for elections in your counties and in California?
Yeah. One thing I'll say is one thing I've been trying to get a handle of is how each county bills their election costs to their local jurisdictions. We're typically would bill election costs to cities, schools, school districts, and local special districts, for example. But we are unable to collect, let's say, from the federal government or the state government for their share of the election. When you have the president and the U.S. Senate race and House of Representatives contest, well, those should be borne by the federal government. And when you have all of the statewide contests, your state legislators and your state leaders, so to speak, such as the governor, as well as the volumes of state propositions, that's a lot of ballot real estate that we facilitate on behalf of this state. And so it starts there is what we need to look at, or how are counties billing those costs, and are they portioning off, even though they're not collecting the federal and government and state government share of the election costs. So in Contra Costa, we have been doing that, for example. And there's a couple different methodologies that have been utilized to determine what those costs are that I want to get too much into the weeds in, but it's a fascinating look at the way that we're doing this. But because of that, we're really trying to find a way that the state can provide sustainable funding to elections. We've seen grants come from federal and state governments, but not sustainable funding. And it'll always be one-offs, right? Health and safety, new voting equipment, cybersecurity, physical security. But what about the natural in and outs that it comprises of the infrastructure of elections, right? And so those are the things that we're really trying to look at and see how we can seek to see if the state would be willing to support that. It's interesting that the State Legislative Analyst Office is assigned to doing another look at election cost. They had published some findings in 2017. This was just as the Voters' Choice Act was coming into reality. And so they were taking that into consideration. And here we are now, 7 years later, where we have maybe half of the counties who've gone to vote centers that they want to take a second look. And with that could be the notion of state funding. And so those are things that we really want to consider. How can we partner with them, and as well as our CSAC, the California State Association of Counties? How can we work together and find a way that that might be able to work to provide funding to counties? I'll just say, looking at other states, there's a lot to be learned from. In Colorado, for example, counties in Colorado receive 45% of their election costs are covered by the state. Before that, it was 90 cents per registered voter. It had been something that started about 20 years ago. And so, and it has evolved. And I think that is something we can seriously look at to see if that's something that we could follow in California.
Yeah, it's been a long time since the state has made a major investment in election infrastructure, like for example, through an initiative or bond measure. Do you think something like that might be in the works in the near future?
Oh, that's great. I never even thought about that, right? We did have that state proposition to replace punch cards back in like 2002 or something. So who knows? Maybe that's another mechanism. It's not one that I thought about, but we certainly have the history with that.
Yeah, again, the idea just came up. It's been a long time since we've had that in California. So one thing that has come up during the conversation, a question that came up is So early on, you had mentioned that the needs of the smaller counties in California, or needs of smaller counties in general in the U.S., are different from the needs of the larger counties. And one of the things that I was thinking when I saw this question was, a lot of people like myself as academic researchers, to be honest, we tend to focus on the larger counties. A lot of the research that I've done has been in collaboration with Orange and with LA County. And there's reasons for that, geographic reasons, but other reasons in terms of the sort of size of the counties and their operations. But what are some of the ways in which, the research community maybe can better understand the needs of the smaller counties, and how can we start to build partnerships with some of the smaller counties so that we're better understanding, what you are doing and what we can do to help?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have noticed, over the last couple of years too, again, the academic world really showing an interest in elections and how can we leverage that, for example. And I think that the understanding of small county challenges is a great one to understand. We should look at, the number of counties in California that are, let's say under 100,000, for example. There's quite a few of them in that way, and it would be great to partner with them and to see what it is that are their challenges. So some things that come to mind immediately are, budgets, right? What is their budget for election cost? What is their staffing levels, right? And especially staffing levels as a ratio to the number of registered voters that they have would be something else to look at. And, and then other challenges could be like, what are the requirements that we have in California, such as language requirements? What are challenges in that way for counties to be able to do all of the activities that we want to see? Those are just things that come off my mind in terms of looking at metrics. Those are things that I looked at and advocated for as I was developing my budget and talking to our grand juries and stuff like that, for them to understand. And I think that would be a great, I'm sure there will be other metrics that we can come up with to try to determine what those challenges would be and how we want to look at and define what those issues are.
So this conversation's been incredible. It's like I just looked at my watch. We've been talking for 40 minutes and we've just scratched the surface, and it feels like we've been talking for 5 minutes. So I want to be cognizant of your time and just ask, is there anything that we haven't talked about that you wanted to raise today?
A couple things come to mind. Let me just say, so one would be, would independent audits of election performance, let's say, would that instill additional trust in elections? Something to think about. I've seen that notion out there nationally, on a national level, for something to consider. In terms of our messaging, I was just reading the San Francisco Chronicle today, and one of the op-eds was, it had to do with the Democratic Party, but something to consider. Democrats must tap into voters' emotions. And that, the way that people make decisions are not necessarily logical, right? It's more emotionally driven. And so what should we do as an election officials to take that into consideration in our efforts to build public trust in elections and find a way that resonates with voters? And that trust in elections may be high now, maybe because of the outcome of the election, but where do we go from here now, right? If we had the opposite outcome, then would the efforts that we had done in Contra Costa, did we still move the mark in terms of gaining trust in elections? But because of the way the outcome was, it's hard to decipher that, I would say, at this stage. So do we just say everything's hunky-dory now and we can just move on, or do we have to continue being vigilant to work towards and understand, the public's needs in terms of what would gain their trust in the election process? And then lastly, I'll just say, for myself, on a personal note, After 22 years in public service, after conducting 6 presidential election cycles, it's amazing when I think back on how many that I've been involved in, that I'm actually going to retire from public service at the end of January. It's been a great ride, but my enthusiasm for elections just can't be contained in one jurisdiction. And, over the last 4 years, as I've said, I've seen a lot of support for elections from the outside, from, let's say, nonprofits, let's say, from the academic world. And I want to continue to foster that support for the profession. I think that that is something that we can continue to do. I think because of we don't know where things are going in terms of public trust and transparency of elections, that we're still on notice for the next 4 years and that we need to do something about it.
Well, I guess that the office hours is getting to a point now where folks are coming on and announcing bombshell, life-changing new directions, which is very exciting. But congratulations on that. I'm super excited, for you, and I'll tell you that I'm really excited to continue working with you as you move forward into whatever new role you're going to be taking on after you retire. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. I really look forward to it, Michael. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you for being with us today. I really appreciate your insight. And again, I really am excited, looking forward to seeing you in January at this conference we're having at Caltech.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.